Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A Guten Moed. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer HaTanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC and is in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Alevi Weinberg Olav Shalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav Shalom, Rabbi Yael HaKohen Kan Olav Shalom, and it's in schus and merit of Rav Zev Yecheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz Le'edech Yomim V'Shanim Teves. It's also in the schus and merit of our holy soldiers in Eretz Yisrael who are giving their lives to protect innocent men, women, and children in the Holy Land, and also protection of and the freedom uninjured and intact of all the hostages. Korav Mamish and a complete Nitzachon and victory for all our people, especially in Eretz Yisrael. So we finished chapter 22 in Tanya, and we did an introduction to chapter 23. Let's sum it all up to understand the context of what we're learning here, especially in context of the larger story in Tanya. We know that the entire Tanya is based on, as the Alter Rebbe himself writes on the Sharblat of Tanya, that it's miyusad ala pasuk. It's based on the verse Kikorev elecha adover me'ed beficha belvavcha la'asesei. The verse says that this thing, Torah Mitzvos, is Korev elecha adover me'ed. It's relevant, it's accessible, it's personal to each one of you, elecha, to you, which means to each one of you, beficha, in our speech, in our mouth, belvavcha, in our hearts, and la'asesei, to action. Eichu korev me'ed, as the Alter Rebbe continues in the Sharblat. So all of Tanya is coming to explain how we, in this world, though it's a dark world, and though we have an animal soul, and we have many challenges and distractions, Yodinish benafshe, as each one of us knows, and yet Korev elecha dover me'ed. Torah Mitzvos that God gave us is close to you, it's relevant to you, it's accessible to you. And that needs explanation. Levayat Heitev, it needs good explanation. How? Eich. Moshe Rabbeinu told us the fact, but Eichu Korev me'ed. So the Alter Rebbe in Tanya explains that each of us must be an Eseti Tzadik Valti Rasha, that we're given a special power, special oath and vow that we take to be a tzaddik, which means to be Korev elecha dover me'ed beficha belvavcha la'asesei. And how is that? Because each of us has a nefesh halikis, a divine soul. So indeed there is an animal soul, correct, and it's with all its challenges, and it battles the divine soul. But we have a nefesh halikis, which is a chelik elikam emal mamish, and it has a personality that is divine, and it has faculties that are divine. And it has levushim, garments, thought, speech, and action that are divine. And when we activate those resources, our faculties, and actualize it and express it through our thought, speech, and action, which is the Aveda that we have to do, Korev elecha dover me'ed. But this is an Aveda, it's work, it's a battle. And this is the battle of the Beinoni who, through contemplation, and through Aveda, through work, comes to the point of Moyach Shalat al Alev, that his mind controls the impulses of the heart and guides it all to dominate. Even though you can't eliminate the animal soul, but you can control it. You control it, shouldn't affect your thought, speech, and action. This is a big part of the sections of the early chapters of Tanya. What I just summed up is basically the first 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17 chapters, where he talks about all of this and the different levels of it. Not everybody is able to contemplate to the point that you wake up emotions, the divine emotions within us. So therefore in chapter 16 he explains, but at least you contemplate what he calls talumes libe. even if you don't have bizgalusly in a revealed way your emotions, at least that your mind has told you that it's appropriate to love God. That's also an effect on us. And at least an effect that affects our actions, meaning our thought, speech, and action, to control that. And as he explains, what that means in detail, in Beficha B'Levavcha La'aseh, that the Levavcha is not that you get the emotions all woken up, but at least enough of Levavcha to affect La'aseh, your actions. Now this requires, as he makes it clear, a contemplation. Even so, may not have the highest level of contemplation, but it still requires an Aveda Momata Lamaila, where you work hard. And that's called Aveda, as he explains in chapter 15. That's the Aveda. A person has to work at this. Then in chapter 18 and on, and we'll say from 18 through 25, we're up to chapter 23, he says, and what about a person that contemplation is not capable of having such a contemplation? Daitik tzara, as he said. His mind is not capable. Even the contemplation of talum mislibe, that it's appropriate. So he says, that person still has ava mesoteres. He has a dormant, innate love that's concealed, and generally does not get revealed unless you work at it. But if there's an emergency where a person is threatened, you see even a kalsha bekalim and pesha Yisrael, who don't have avodah. Not like the earlier chapters where he talks about the avodah of Meir Shal Talev and his bonus and contemplation, where a person contemplates, as he said back in chapter 3. He contemplates on Mamal Kalam and on Seviv Kalam with Chachma Bina Das. He explains the detail there. On what on Mamal Kalam, Seviv Kalam, and Kula Kamei Kala Chashiv. Here we're talking about Pesha Yisrael and Kalsha Bekalim, but they still have that dormant spark still alive. And when they're challenged, you'll see that they're ready to go on Mesiras Nefesh, as he explained. But that's only when they're challenged. What about the rest of the time? Now, of course, someone that has the contemplation, they also have the Ava Mesoteres, as we discussed back in those chapters. But now we're talking about someone, remember, Karev Elecha means everybody. To use the exact expression in chapter 18, what he says, let's just read the inside, exactly the words. What does he say? Ki af misha daitek tzore b'yediyas Hashem. Meaning that his mind is too weak to have any mental appreciation or cognitive appreciation. And it does not have a heart. His capacity of the heart is not one that can contain the greatness of God, to the point that it gives birth to love and reverence. Even the meichivit tumunase levad, meaning that it's fitting to love. The level of explains in chapter 16. Af al pikein korevelev hadavar ma'ed. You have to say it's also korevelecha. There's no exceptions. So how could we say that? Lishmer elasas kol mitzvos atera, even including tel matera keneged kulam. So that's due to the fact that because there's a hidden love in the lev klolos Yisrael. And that emerges, that's triggered when there's a challenge, as he continues to explain later in chapters 18 and 19. Okay, but here's the question. What about the rest of the time? Do we need to wait for an emergency? So that's where the chapters 18, 19 cover that. That's why chapters 20 through 25 discuss that. And the process, the Alter Rebbe includes a whole dimension here, which is not dependent on a contemplation of hard work, of getting your mind and your emotions so trained. We're talking about someone who's involved in this material world, and their mind and emotions are involved in animal soul activities, which means self-interest. And yet, there's another aspect to the whole story, which only complements what we learned earlier, but it opens the door for Korav Elecha for everybody, even someone that is not able to condition their mind and their emotions toward godliness. And what is that? That's an understanding of the essential nature of who we are as a human being. So I'm going to use an example from places from the Rebbe Sichos and other places to really explain it. And this really leads us into our relationship with God, the fundamental relationship. So it's one thing a person works hard, as I said, and through the Aveda, through their mind, as a conditioning of the mind and emotions, to be in a more refined place. There's another fundamental aspect here. So let's begin with there's a halacha that says the following: that if you hire someone to be a shemer, to protect your property, you give them an animal to protect, the behemoth. So since they accept it, even if you don't pay them, there's certain responsibilities, or else they just don't accept it. Since you accept the responsibility, you have to make sure this animal does not damage others or other people's property, and the animal itself is protected not to be hurt. That's what the shemer, that's what the guardian has to do. What happens if the animal, so therefore, for example, if the animal's walking down the street and walks into someone else's property and breaks keli, a vessel in their garden, so you're responsible. Or if the animal, you let the animal go down a cliff by mistake. The animal didn't know, so you're responsible. What happens if the animal jumps into a fire? And the cliff I'm saying is the case where the animal didn't know, because the animal did not jump off a cliff, as we're going to discuss. But the animal, inadvertently, you allow the animal to get hurt. Inadvertently from the animal's point of view. But what happens if the animal walks into a fire and gets damaged, gets killed or hurt? Are you responsible? The answer is no. Because no animal would ever walk into a fire. Only a behemoth sheta. Something has to be wrong. It has to be an insane animal, because the animal has self-protection. It wouldn't walk into a fire. You were given an animal. You weren't told this is a crazy animal. So you're watching the animal from normal damages, that it shouldn't get into any situation that it can get hurt, a normal situation, but not something that's a situation that's abnormal. So the Rebbe brings from this a proof that there's a certain natural instinct that a person has not to hurt themselves. So when we talk about mitzvahs and avedas, we have to understand mitzvah comes from the word tzavsa v'chibur. Connection. When a person does a mitzvah, think of it like behaving in a way that's healthy for you. No healthy person is going to eat something that's poisonous. Every healthy person is going to gravitate to something that's healthy. The only reason one would eat something that's not healthy, either they don't know that it's not healthy, that it's toxic, or they know and they're not paying attention, they don't care. But anyone that's fully cognizant is not going to do something destructive, just like you wouldn't put your hand into fire. And the same thing the opposite. On the positive side, you're going to do everything possible to protect yourself. So a mitzvah is a connection, because what is it doing? It's aligning you with who you should be, your healthiest possible way. So this is not just a matter of contemplation. You're contemplating on the greatness of God. You're contemplating, and your heart is awakening toward transcendent feelings toward godliness. This is pashut basic survival. That there are healthy ways of behavior. The Torah told us, behold, I give before you today two paths, the path of life and the path of opposite of life, the path of blessing and the path opposite. Choose life. Can a person do something self-destructive? Of course they can, but it's usually a case. That's why we say, a person doesn't sin unless there's a moment of insanity. Why do you need insanity? A person has a taiva. His animal soul had an impulse, temptation, because you would never do something that's destructive to yourself. So you have to say there's a ruach shtus like this, like the behemoth shaita, walk into fire. And it's the same thing, the opposite. A person is always going to do something that's healthy for them and good for them. So in other words, being aligned with God through Torah and Mitzvos, or I should say, being through Torah and Mitzvos, one gets aligned with God, and therefore you're a healthier person. This does not require a deep contemplation, and we'll learn more about this later as we get to chapter 25. But I'm saying this in order to give some context here. So when we're talking about these chapters, is basically laying out the point. What is reality? The reality is godliness. The fact that we feel ourselves as independent, an independent consciousness, is simply due to because God's concealing his presence from us. So therefore we can wander off and do things on our own. So in truth, when a person is doing a mitzvah, they're actually aligning themselves with reality. That's why all the mitzvahs are part of Anochi Hashem Elokecha, which is God's unity. Everything is under that rubric. Everything is an extension of God's reality, God's unity. And there's nothing outside of it. And there's nothing, on the other hand, there's nothing outside of God's reality. In other words, there's no duality at all going on. The fact that we feel that that's also part of reality that God created, concealed his presence, like we learned at length, and therefore there could be things that are defy God. It's a blindness. It's a moment of insanity. So a person has the ability to override that, and that's what we need to think about. And that will lead us to Karev Elecha Dover Meid. But the point being is that we're talking now. Why is the Kal Shebekalim and Peish Yisrael so threatened, and therefore reacts when there's an emergency situation and said, are you going to bow down to an idol and it will not bow down? Because they feel then that it's dangerous. They see the fire. The rest of the time we don't see it. So we could think, we're living a life. It may not be the way God wants, but you don't see the damage. You don't see the toxic effects. It's like somebody eating poison but doesn't feel that it's poison or doesn't know that it's poison. And the same thing on the positive side. So all Torah and Mitzvos Esa, all go under the concept of the unity, connecting to God and therefore connected to healthy life, to the best you can be because you're connecting to reality. And Aveda comes from the word Havara Reshus L'Reshus. The opposite of connection is what is a disconnection, a dissonance. A disconnect from your healthy being is by doing something that's poisonous and toxic and destructive. The only thing is we're not aware of it. Why? Because of the tzimtzumim. What the Alter Rebbe is coming to teach us is that we could become aware of it, and we have to become aware of it. And this is not the hisbonenus and the hisbonenus with the mind and the feeling of the lev, whether it's midas begoli or talumis libe, either revealed feelings in the heart or even talumis libe, which still requires some contemplation. Even without that, when you talk about a kal shebekalim and peish yisrael, someone or anyone that doesn't have that capacity to contemplate and to feel, this everyone can relate to. Your life, your very life, to be connected to what is healthy, and to be disconnected, and to not connect yourself and not associate yourself with something that's not healthy. So the entire discussion, to sum it up in simple language, is exactly that. Is to understand that godliness is the true reality, and everything is all an extension of that reality. Like the Dibur Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Dibur of Hashem, is what sustains everything. Everything is completely nullified to that. Furthermore, that very Dibur is part of God himself. It's not outside of him, let's say, by the speech of a human being as we speak to another. It's all part of that one divine, omnipresent, seamless unity. However, like Dibur, it actually has the capacity to create something that perceives itself as a separate entity. And that's why it's called Dibur Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because it is speech, it's not thought. And therefore, from our point of view, not from God's point, from our point of view, the tzimtzumim have an effect. And the effect is that we're blinded. And there can be a ruach shtus that conceals the truth and reality. But now comes the work of discovering the true unity, even in a world of duality. So how do you do that? That's why we have Torah and Mitzvos. That's the teichen, that's the content of chapter 23. He's going to tell us how now everything is included in Anoichi, all the Torah and Mitzvos, all the positive mitzvahs. In chapter 24, he's going to talk about how all the negative mitzvahs is the opposite, is in the negation of duality of that there shouldn't be anything else outside of God. So two things: everything is within God, and there's nothing outside of God. Those are the two main commandments. Essentially, that you want to be the fullest, complete person connected to truth and reality. You have to do Anochi Hashem, you have to know Anochi Hashem Elokech, and that permeates every mitzvah, because every mitzvah is an extension of that unity. And especially the mitzvah of Torah, as we shall learn. And on the other side, which we'll learn in chapter 24, every Leisa says, do not do this, because by doing that, you're separating yourself from that reality. Elikim Acherim. Like he said, coming from Achorayim, and Elikim Acherim, that it is an entity that is another entity of Aniva Avsiyeh that is outside of godliness. Like we learned at the end of chapter 22, why it's called Elikim Acherim. Because like Gaiva, Gasus Ruach is called like Aveda Zara, because you're pulling yourself away, you're a separate entity. I'm a separate entity. And it's Mamash Kfire, Bachdusei Shel Melech Malchei Amlochim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because you're feeling yourself as something separate. I'm a separate entity. And all the mitzvahs leisa go under that category of La'yil Chalakim Acherim. But that's chapter 24. So now the content of the chapter we're going to learn now is all about this. How to experience unity, that you can bring that unity of the divine, pre-Tzimtzum, into a post-Tzimtzum reality. Meaning in a reality where we see ourselves and feel ourselves as separate entities. How could something that's a separate entity? The answer is because we're accessing Torah mitzvahs that allows us to experience the consciousness of divine unity. So the world itself, everything in this material world, including ourselves, our initial consciousness, feels itself independent. Why? Because the concealment covers it up. And Torah mitzvahs realigns us. Like I said, mitzvahs, Miloshen Tzavse v'chibur, and for short Torah, which is one with Hashem. That allows us to see the universe from the perspective of God. So we're talking about bringing that divine unity into a world that on its own could be one that would seem to experience duality. And once a person can relate to that, basically, that everyone, you, have the capacity to relate to the divine in existence. That's what Torah Mitzvahs does. The mere performance of mitzvahs and the mere learning of Torah. And this is an addition, and notwithstanding what we learned earlier, that the contemplation up till chapter 18, meaning up till concluding chapter 17, which was the Aveda of his Bonnus and his Seidus of Midas Shebelev, or at least Talumis Libe. And that's how this chapter continues. So in contrast to what we learned, that the concealments allow for independent consciousness, now the Alter Rebbe is introducing, okay, so what do we do with that? What we do with that is we counter it with Torah mitzvahs. So the Alter Rebbe goes, V'im kol hanal yuvim v'yavur heitev, b'teisvus bir. Based on the above discussion, where we talked about the divine unity as reality, and everything is an extension of that. However, there's a concealment that allows for a lekim acherim to emerge, meaning for another entity to feel that it itself is independent of the divine to the point of aniva avsiyed, me and nothing else. So based on that above discussion of that non-duality, of that unity, he says, Yuvim v'yavur heitev. We can explain. We'll understand and we can explain well B'teisvus bir, with additional insight, Masha Amru b'Zayar, what it says in Zayar, the Reisa v'Kutshabrichu hu kul echad, that the Torah and God are totally one. So this is the Zayar, the Reisa v'Kutshabrichu kul echad. What is it? What is the Zayar coming to be machadash here? First of all, the Torah is of course one. It's Chachmaseh D'Shena Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But he's going to explain that oneness is the counterforce to the duality that is possible due to an independent consciousness, due to the tzimtzumim that make us feel that we're separate from the divine. And Torah is telling us, no, when you have Torah, Torah creates achad im kutchabrichu. Kul achad. Now what does he mean, teisvus bir? That means suggests that there was already explanation before, because teisvus bir is coming in chapter 5. The Alter Rebbe spoke about how Torah connects us to God, that when a person learns Torah, their mind becomes completely united with God's mind. You say, Aseichel hamuskel and the maskil all become one. We'll discuss later what does this add over what it says in chapter 5. The teisvus bir is coming to add a whole explanation to this. But he doesn't stop with Torah. He says, "Ubitikunim pirshu," and Tikkun Zeir explains that this connection with God, with God's consciousness, even as we are down and below, where there can be an independent consciousness, said Tikkun pirshu the Ramach pikudin inun Ramach evarin de Malka. So first of all, the Zohar, let me give you the Maramokim for the Zohar, is in Chelik Aleph, Chav Dalet Aleph 24a, and Chelik Bey is Samach Aleph 60a. The Tikkun Zohar, which is in Tikkun Zohar Tikkun Lamed, the 30th, which in the pages is 74a. He says like this: Ramach Pikudin, the 248 positive mitzvahs are the 248 organs of the king. So the muscle is of a king, and he has organs, arms, legs, a head, a heart, and the mitzvahs are literally compared to those organs. Obviously it's a muscle, but it also indicates that the mitzvahs are one with the king. They're not garments that he dresses. It's not royal garments. It's part of who the very essence of who he is. And yet Torah, it says the word as we're going to learn later, is even a deeper unity, because it's his very essence. Whereas limbs or organs are part of who he is, but it's not mama's the same essence. That we'll discuss later. But what do we see? That the Zohar and the Tikkun Zohar make it very clear that we're given, when we're given Torah mitzvahs, we're actually given something that's a unifying force. That in our conscious existence, when you connect to Torah, you connect to mitzvahs, you're connecting to God himself. Because they're both united with God. The creation of existence, obviously is created by God, but the tzimtzumim have had its impact. So we don't feel that unity. But in Torah mitzvahs, that unity is completely revealed, as we shall discuss. So we'll stop here, and we'll continue in the next year. Everyone have a good moed and a good yontif, moedim l'simcha. And we'll continue next week. Motzoi yontif, Motzoi Shabbos Bereshis, TanyaApplied.com, and a good moed and a good yontif and a good Geben Shnior.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.